Okay, welcome to Treasurer Part 1. Yes, we have 2 parts for Treasurer because this is a big job and it matters. There we go. Okay, can you all see my screen? Thumbs up, because I can only see about 5 people. Thank you, Julie Bocock, who I'm seeing a thumbs up, and Maria Garner. I appreciate it. A little introduction. My name is Jessica Sheen. I am the current 1st District Treasurer, and I am also the President-elect. So starting July 1, intimidatingly enough, I will be your 1st District President. Finance is my background. I was an auditor by trade, so I was a CPA. So this stuff is kind of in my wheelhouse. It makes sense to me. A couple meeting norms that we'll talk about before we jump in. You will see that the chat should be disabled. If it's not, or it's not to everybody. If it's not, Amy's going to make sure that happens. The goal is that we want you guys to focus on the presentation and not on what's happening in the chat. We've all been on meetings where the chat goes crazy and you get distracted by the chat. I get distracted by the chat. And so if you have a question, please send that question in the chat to Amy Cam. Amy will be gathering all the questions, and she will be, we'll pause kind of as we go through and we'll say, okay, does anybody have any questions? The great thing about today, and the difference if you went to Cactus training, is this is personal, right? We want you to know us. We want you to be able to come to us and ask us questions. We are your leaders. And all that means is that we've been in PTA a little bit longer than you guys and have maybe a little bit more PTA experience. That's all that means. But we want to make sure that we're answering your questions today so that you feel prepared to go jump into your job. So let's see. I think I might actually need, nope. I'm going to start a poll, okay? And everybody take a moment. You should, okay, I'm going to give it about 30 seconds. This is just getting a gauge of what your PTA experience is. If there's not one that fits perfectly, that's okay. Just choose the one that's closest enough. This is fascinating. I get to see it come through. Okay, I'm going to give it about 15 more seconds. Five more seconds. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the poll. Okay, this is fantastic, guys. So what is your experience as a PTA treasurer? 74% of you says I'm brand new and this is my very first training. So yay for coming. We are so glad that you guys are here today. We are here to make sure that you know how to do your job. You're going to have questions after that. That's okay. My email for the next 20 days or so is treasurer@pta1.org. As of July 1, that turns over to Amy at treasurer@pta1.org. You can email us your questions. We will definitely reach out to you and make sure that you have answers. Okay, so 74% are new. I have a term or 2 under my belt, but I still have questions. That is 13% of us. I'm a seasoned treasurer, but can always learn something new. That is 8%. And then I'm a council treasurer and will be training my unit treasurers this year. That is 5%. Fantastic. Here's what we need to know about that, guys. No matter what level you are in PTA, you will learn something new. I've been in PTA for 10 years. I have a background in accounting. I went to California State PTA's training this summer, and I learned something new. Every single training I'm on, I learned something new. So thank you for coming today. Okay, we're going to jump into our presentation, part 1. Buckle up, guys. It's a lot, but we want to make sure that you know everything that you need to know. Okay. I've got to get this off. Why am I not advancing? There we go. That's how we're going to do it. Fiduciary responsibilities. What are your fiduciary responsibilities? PTAs must be fiscally responsible to all their members, and they need to ensure that the financial procedures and laws are followed. Most people think that this is the responsibility of just 3 officers, the treasurer, the auditor, and the financial secretary. But in reality, this is the responsibility of every single executive board member to ensure that all the assets of the PTA are protected and ensure that we're following the financial procedures. The assets are more than just money. They include the volunteers and they include the reputation of the PTA. Financial resources. There are a ton of financial resources up here. One that I would recommend everybody familiarize yourself is toolkit.capta.org. If you have a question on finance, you can go to the finance part of toolkit.capta.org. You can print that off, familiarize yourself with it. If you have a question, go there first because the answer will be there. If you need help interpreting it, reach out to a seasoned treasurer, reach out to one of us. But toolkit.capta.org is going to be your best friend for the next however long you're involved in PTA, but definitely for your term as the treasurer. So familiarize yourself with that. When you get to your taxes, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, we have this amazing woman named Donna Burchard at CAPTA, and her email is taxinfo@capta.org, and she can answer any questions. You can also email me. I'm fairly good at taxes at this point. Your bylaws. You don't have to raise your hand, but have you been given your bylaws yet? Every single treasurer should have a copy of your bylaws. In fact, in one of your very first meetings, your entire board should meet and review the PTA's bylaws as a group so that everybody has the same knowledge and responsibility of the timelines and the responsibilities that govern your PTA. So make sure you've got those bylaws. The insurance guide is critical, especially for treasurers, to know what we can and can't do. So if you go to capta.org and go under their insurance, the AIM insurance guide will be there. Make sure you know where that is so you can reference that at any time. The next 4 financial resources are just the taxes, and we will get to those later. Your job as a treasurer, as outgoing treasurer in every year, is to ensure that your taxes are filed. Okay. So the role of a treasurer, what is your role? You are an elected member of the board, which means you are an officer, which means you have a voice on the executive board as a member of the association. You are the most senior manager of the PTA funds. And you are also the chair of the budget committee. So the budget, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you should always have a separate budget committee meeting and going through your budget before you present it to your executive board. I always say in PTA, preparation is everything. We all hate those 3-hour-long meetings. The greatest thing to keep a 3-hour meeting down to a 1-hour meeting is preparation. And that's what happens with use of your committees. Okay, immediately upon election, all of us have most likely been elected to be the treasurer. So the first thing you're going to want to do is meet. Get to know each one of your executive board members. As a treasurer, make sure that you and the president have worked out your process. You guys are going to work together a lot, especially signing checks and going through authorizations. So make sure that maybe you have office hours at school every single week, or maybe there's just a certain time during the week. If you both work, it might be a Thursday night, right? But make sure that you have a time that you guys have set aside so you can connect kind of on a weekly basis. That's going to be important. You're going to want to survey the school's needs. As And this is the perfect time to send out a survey to parents, to send out a survey to the teachers. We always want to include our teachers because we are a parent-teacher association and their voice is incredibly important. Make sure as a board-elect, you talk about your goals and make sure that these are not your personal goals, right? That's why we do a survey, so that we understand what the school's needs are and that the goals that we set as a PTA are in line with the needs of the school. The one other thing I would say about that that is critical is ensure that you are working with your principal. Your principal is the administrator of your school site as hired by the school district. They are an advisor to the PTA. And with that, they have a vote on the executive board, but we are guests on a school site. So anything that we do needs to be in line with the principal's goals as well. I always say that the most important relationship in a PTA is that between the president and the administrator. So treasurers, ensure that you are also helping and connecting with that principal and you understand what his or her goals are for the school as well. Okay, training. We're here. We've done it, right? You're here today. Congratulations. Don't stop. If council has training, go to that training. If CAPTA provides training, go to that training. Soak in as much information as you can. And then finally, financial reports. You're going to want to familiarize with yourself with the financial reports. And we'll talk about that, but I'm sure you went to your association meetings. As an incoming board member, it's so important to just kind of sit back and listen to what they're doing. I'm going to give you some tips as we move forward today. Okay, transitioning with your outgoing treasurer. So you're going to want to make sure that you understand the accounting system that they use. There's no required accounting system in PTA, although we do recommend MyPTEZ. MyPTEZ, formerly PTA Easy, is a very non-accountant accounting program. It is very user-friendly for those of us who are not accountants. And that's really important because people don't need to understand double-sided entries or debits and credits just to be the treasurer. Anybody can be the treasurer if you can balance your checkbook. That's what I always say. If you can balance your checkbook, you can be a PTA treasurer. But understand the accounting system. It might be an Excel spreadsheet, it might be Quicken or QuickBooks, and it might be MyPTEZ, but understand that. Understand the reports that are used. You're going to have a lot of reports, and we'll talk about those today. The annual financial report, the treasurer's report. If you have a financial secretary, you'll have a financial secretary's report. Make sure you have the audited records. This is critical. As a treasurer, do not take on a role unless the outgoing books or the books of the outgoing treasurer have been audited. I was asked recently to be the treasurer of a local nonprofit here. For 6 months, I asked for audited books and they never gave them to me. And so I had to step away. This is to protect you as a volunteer. You don't want to take control of anything that somebody else that hasn't gone through a thorough audit or review. You want to make sure that you protect yourself and that you pick up clean books as you begin your job as the treasurer. Some treasurer supplies, make sure you get anything that they have. You're going to want the checkbook. You're going to want to have any of the paperwork that they use. So understand what those supplies are for your specific association and make sure that you get those. Let's see. This is going to include any logins and passwords, right? So for your bank account, for your accounting system, make sure that those logins and passwords are passed on and maybe change those. Actually, change those passwords so that they are unique to the new treasurer coming in. Okay. And then we'll talk about the annual financial report and the tax returns. You're going to want to make sure you had last year's audited annual financial report and the tax returns. It is the responsibility of the outgoing treasurer to do the taxes. So the treasurer that ends as of June 30th needs to make sure that the taxes for that fiscal year are filed. That is not the responsibility of the incoming treasurer. And why? Right? There's a lot of confusion around this. Well, the reason is because you didn't do the books. You don't understand. You weren't there for all the decisions. You might have been as part of the board, but it was not your responsibility. So it is the responsibility of the outgoing treasurer to ensure those taxes are filed. Now, because you're picking up this job, you're going to want to make sure that you confirm that they are filed. If you're June 30th, those are going to need to be filed by November 15th. We'll talk about more about the dates as we continue. Okay, bank accounts. You have to have approved signers. Does everybody know where the approved signers come from? They are dictated in your bylaws. Your bylaws will say that the president, the treasurer, and one other person, maybe two in some units, but usually one other person is the approved signer. And so at the election meeting or the last association meeting of the year, you're going to want to make sure that that's documented in the minutes, because those minutes are what you're going to take to your bank. So you're going to want to make sure that the bank has a copy of your bylaws and has a copy of your election, so they know who was elected into those roles, and has a copy of the minutes where you specifically say, we make a motion to remove this person, and this person as signers on our bank, and we are adding the new president, treasurer, and third signer. And you're going to want to take those with you when you go to the bank. So let's talk about your trip to the bank. Every bank is different. I can't tell you how many different kinds of things I've heard banks ask for. So the most important thing, so you're not wasting anybody's time, is to call your bank before you go, right? You're going to want to make sure that you know exactly who needs to be there. Some banks let you come in one by one. Some banks require you all three to be there together. And some banks require not only all three to come in together, the new signers, but they also require the past signers to accompany you to approve the change. So make sure you call that bank in advance to make sure that you have everything you need when you go to the bank together. Okay, this is very important. Make sure the previous signers are all removed. The only signers moving forward should be the ones that we just elected. So anybody previously on the account must be removed. Make sure that that happens when you go to that bank. Okay, and you're going to want to make sure that this happens for every single one of your bank accounts. Most of us have one. If we bank with a credit union, we have two because they require us to have that savings account as well. Some of us have 4 different accounts. Make sure we're doing it for every single one of our bank accounts. Bank statements. We get a lot of questions on bank statements. So bank statements should not ever be mailed to the home of the president or the treasurer. Bank statements should always be mailed to the school address. Okay. If a bank doesn't have paper statements, well, first of all, we recommend paper statements. PTA recommends paper statements. Even though personally, we all want to check the box and save the paper, right? And all of us at home don't have anything coming through mail anymore. As a PTA, we want paper statements because that is one of our procedures and one of our controls. If your bank doesn't allow for paper statements, then a non-signer needs to have view-only access to be able to print statements. A non-signer is so not the president, not the treasurer, and not that third signer. We recommend usually the auditor. The auditor is going to have to look at this stuff at some point. So we recommend that the auditor is the one that would have that view-only online access. This is bolded for a reason, guys. Statements must be opened or printed if you don't have paper statements, reviewed, dated, and signed by a non-check signer before the treasurer takes custody of those bank accounts or bank statements. Why? Bank statements can be doctored. We've seen it happen. So we want to make sure that somebody who's not the treasurer, doesn't have access to the accounts, doesn't have access to the funds, is reviewing those bank statements on a monthly basis and just looking for anything that might look a little bit odd. Okay. We recommend at this time that it is the auditor and that they do something called the monthly 5-minute audit. I'm not going to dive into that. It's just a quick overview to make sure procedures are being followed. Are we canceling checks? Is there a long outstanding voided check that should be voided? Is there any cash that's coming out? Because we know we don't deal in cash in PTA. We're going to verify that all of our checks have 2 signatures. So we're just going to look through our deposits and our checks and make sure that nothing jumps out at us. And if the auditors does this, this is something that helps them because they're going to have to do it for the audit anyway. Okay. Reconciling the bank statement. So bank reconciliations must be done monthly for every single account. And I recommend that you do that within a few days of receiving that bank statement. So usually by the 10th of the month, 10th of the following month, that bank statement should be reconciled. Why? That is how we find odd things on our bank statements. So First District was the victim of check fraud 2 years ago. And the way I found that was through my bank reconciliation. Had I not been doing a timely bank reconciliation, if I had waited until the end of the year, more and more checks, they were using the same 2 checks and redepositing them over and over. And had I waited and not done it on a timely basis, they could have continued to steal thousands and thousands from First District PTA. But reconciling the bank statement in a timely manner is what saved us from having more funds stolen from First District PTA. So once those bank statements are reconciled, they're going to be reviewed and signed by a non-check signer. Again, I recommend that this is the auditor. I recommend that you're at your executive board meeting, the treasurer bring their books, their binder that we'll talk about in a little bit, their bank reconciliations and their bank statements, and they just hand it over to the auditor to do that 5-minute audit and to review and sign the bank reconciliation. Again, the auditor is going to have to do all of this at the end of the year. If we allow them to do it monthly, then their job at the end of the year is going to be much easier. This is really, really important. If we ever have any insurance, so when First District lost their money, was a victim of check fraud, if we had not followed our process and the bank wasn't able to get our money back to us, we have recourse through our insurance, through AIM insurance. We all pay a premium every single year, and we have recourse through that insurance. However, we only have recourse through insurance if we are following our procedures. So I want to make sure that this procedure right here, the statements open, printed or reviewed, dated and signed by a non-check signer, and the reconciliations are reviewed and signed by a non-check signer. We want to make sure that we're doing those, because if money is stolen, our insurance might come and look and say, well, I want to see all this stuff. And if we haven't done it, that might give them an out for the claim. Okay, I am going to pause right here before we move on to organizing our records and ask if we have any questions. Amy, do we have any questions at this point?
Hi, Jessica. Yes, we do. A question in the chat. Would the compliance officer have access to view-only bank statements as well?
That's a good question. I don't believe it's an issue to have any officer have view-only access to the bank statements. So if the compliance officer is an elected officer, then I believe that is perfectly fine. That person could also act if the auditor or the other person that has the view-only access wasn't available. They could always act as a backup to print that. So absolutely, if they are an elected officer, they certainly can have that view-only access.
Okay, so a similar question, but on the other side is, does the person who signs the bank statement have to be on the board?
No, they need to be a PTA member. It does not have to be as an executive board member, but they must be a PTA member.
Awesome. That's all we have for now, Jessica. Thank you.
Okay. Hey guys, keep those questions coming. I want to say that if you have a question, my guess is half the other people in here have a question as well. Don't be afraid to throw that question in the chat. That's why we're here. We want to make sure that we're answering all of your questions.
You know what, Jessica, I spoke too soon.
Okay.
Someone would like the definition of reconcile. What do you mean by reconcile?
That is a great question. So if you when you're reconciling, let's think back to our checkbook, right? What's the word? If we reconcile our checkbook, I'm such an accountant. That's the only one I can see. If we balance our checkbook, that's what it is. So if you balance your checkbook, and I know, okay, it's June 1 and I'm going to balance my checkbook. I need to make my mortgage payment and I have $5,000 in my bank account, but I know that I wrote a check to my kid's school for $300 and it hasn't been deposited yet. So I now have a difference between what my bank statement is showing me and what my checkbook is showing me my balance is, right? You know, because we all keep our checkbooks now, right? Because that's the day and age. But this is the easiest way to explain it. So if we know that amount, that $5,000 that is sitting in our bank's account isn't available to us, because I know I already wrote a check to draft funds from that. So I know that I only have $4,700 available to cover my expenses, right? That's the same thing as a bank reconciliation. If you look at your checkbook as your ledger and you look at your bank statement, we're reconciling between those two. Did that answer your question?
I think that's a great explanation. I'm not sure we're going to be able to hear if that answered the question right this second, but there is one more question about reconciliation.
Yep.
And having the auditor signing bank statements during the pandemic. So the question is, reconciling and having the auditor sign bank statements prior to the treasurer reviewing them was not possible during the pandemic. How do we accomplish this since we are not meeting in person?
Okay, so fantastic question. It's not possible. I was the auditor. I still am the auditor for Glendale Council PTA. And so what would happen is the bank statement would come to Glendale Unified School District. It would be dropped off unopened on my porch. I would open it, review it, sign it, and date it. And then I would take it to the treasurer's house. So we were able to follow that. It took a little bit more time. And, you know, if you're in a unit and you live close to each other, that's more doable. Imagine what it was in First District, where we live either all the way from Burbank to Pomona. So you're right, there were some definite challenges during the pandemic. The other thing is we saw a lot of people add that view only access to your bank accounts for that person to be able to print it off. That paper copy still needs to be taken to the treasurer. And so what we recommended was that you just figure out a process where you drop it off on his or her doorstep. So there wasn't that interpersonal connection. Although now most of us are vaccinated and are more comfortable. So going forward, I would expect us to fall back into the original process. And remember, if you feel that something's not doable, these are rules for a reason. And so make sure you reach out to your council treasurer or to us at First District PTA, because we can help with one-off situations, right? And there's always those one-off situations that we want to make sure that we work through to make sure that the job of the treasurer is doable for our volunteers. Anything else, Amy, before we jump back in?
That covers it for now.
Okay, great. Organizing your records. What you will realize as a treasurer is you have paper coming out of your ears, right? And I've seen treasurer records organized in lots of different ways. I am a binder person. I like to hole punch everything and keep it in a binder. I've seen people use those flexible little paper filing systems. Those work as well. Sometimes follow what the previous treasurer did. You don't have to recreate the wheel, but you're going to want to make sure that you set it up from the viewpoint of the auditor, right? We're going to want to make sure that the auditor can easily get through everything and find what they need. So in your records, you're going to have your treasurer's reports from your executive board meetings and your association meetings. You're going to have every month's bank statement and reconciliation from every single bank account. You're going to have a cash verification, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and deposit records for all of your income. You're going to have authorizations for payments and receipts for every single check that you write or expenditure that you do through your bank account. You're going to want to look at your record retention schedule. If I didn't include this, I will upload this today, because this is critical. Some of our treasure records are permanent, which means they must be kept forever. Amy, have you had a chance to drop into the chat the link to where all of the presentation and the handouts are stored for today's presentation?
I will do that right now.
That would be amazing, because we're going to go there in a little bit. Okay, so what do I have to have in my treasurer's binder or my treasurer's notebook? I'm going to want to have the calendars so they're easily accessible. I'm going to want to have all the agendas of the executive board and the association meetings. I'm going to want to have, very, very importantly, the minutes of the executive board meeting and the minutes and the association. That's very important, and we'll understand that in a little bit. I'm going to want to have the original adopted budget as well as my current budget, because budgets can be updated. I'm going to want to have last year's annual financial report so I know where I started, right? I'm going to want to have previous tax filings so that I know that they were filed. I'm going to want to have the audits because that shows what my beginning balances are. I'm going to want to have every executive board and association treasurer's report, the bank statements, the bank reconciliations, cash verification forms, payment authorizations, conflict of interest and whistleblower forms. This is the responsibility of the treasurer to gather those. At your very first executive board meeting of the year, bring a stack or send them the PDF of the conflict of interest whistleblower form. If you don't know what that is, you can go to capta.org right now, or you can just Google conflict of interest whistleblower form CAPTA, and it's going to pull that up. You want every single officer on your board is required to sign that annually, and you are required to keep that in your treasurer's binder. And then finally, we talked about it a little bit before, bylaws. Make sure you have a copy of your bylaws in your binder so you can flip through it. Also, you're going to hand this binder to your auditor. Your auditor is going to want to review your bylaws. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into the treasurer's binder. I've had binders that are this thick for half of a year. For first district, it's not a binder. It's a carrying case. It's a little bit bigger. So be prepared to keep all of that and keep it organized. The more you're organized on a monthly basis, the better your job's going to be, the more prepared you're going to be to explain things to your executive board and your association. I do not recommend leaving this all to the end. I recommend doing it on a weekly, if not monthly basis. Okay. First association meeting of the year. So you are at your first association meeting of the year. It is the treasurer show. You will be talking a lot. And so you're going to want to be prepared. You're going to want to have the annual financial report from the prior year presented and filed for audit. You're going to want to have the year-end audit adopted. The auditor will do that. You're going to want to share the fundraisers and programs, and you're going to want to have those approved. You're going to want to share the budget and make sure that that is adopted by your association. And then you're going to have a couple different treasurer's reports. So the first treasurer's report is going to be whatever period wasn't covered for the last year. So if your last association meeting in the previous fiscal year was in May, then you need to make sure that the first association meeting of the year you're presenting, say it was on May 22nd. The very first thing you're going to do is report, give a treasurer's report from May 23rd to June 30th. Now, the outgoing treasurer should have done that for you, should provide that for you. But you need to make sure, because that wasn't reported to the association, that we do that at the first meeting of the year. With that, any checks that weren't ratified for approval or ratified for payment since May 22nd, you need to make sure that those are ratified. So you're going to present a treasurer's report to be filed for audit. You're going to present all the checks from May 23rd to June 30th, or if you're a May 31st year end, it would be May 23rd to May 31st. And you're going to ensure that the association ratifies those payments. You're essentially ratifying the actions of the treasurer in making those payments. And then you're going to do the treasurer's report for this year. So if your first meeting is on August 18th, you're going to do July 1st to August 18th. You're going to do a treasurer's report. We'll talk about what's in a treasurer's report in a minute. And then you're going to do another list of the checks, any checks or payments that have been done or need to be done from July 1st to August 18th. You're going to want to ratify those. So the first association meeting of the year is busy because you have two sets. You need to finish the business of last year's association, and then you need to start the business this year. And then you're always going to release funds. And I guarantee you, every single one of you has a billion questions right now. This is a tough thing to understand. We'll get you there. You're going to release funds, okay? Releasing funds means I've adopted the audit, okay? Or sorry, I've adopted the budget. I now have a budget that's approved, which means that if I have my carnival coming up, I've put $3,000 for my carnival, and the association's approved that amount. Now, before I can spend it, I need to ask the association, is it okay if I release those funds? Do I have your approval to use those funds? So that's what the release of funds is. Before any payment, we need to make sure that we ask the association to release the funds. So let's jump out of this for a second. I want to show you something. This is important. So Amy just dropped this into the chat. So the first two are PDFs of this presentation that you can refer back to, okay? This A right here, we're gonna open up. This is gonna be your best friend. These are motions and minutes, and I'm gonna open up, let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger for you guys. So you hear motions, you've been to PTA meetings, you know how they're supposed to sound, but now you've got to do them yourself. And every single one of us, the very first time we made a motion was like shaking because we didn't know what to say. Am I going to do it right? I'm nervous coming into the meeting. Don't worry about it. Here's the words. So here's your treasurer's report for the previous year. The treasurer is going to come in and they're going to say, the beginning balance on 5/22/21 was $12,000. Deposits totaled $1,000. Disbursements totaled $3,000, leaving an ending balance on 6/31/21 of $10,000. The president is going to say, are there any questions? Sometimes there's questions, sometimes there's not. If you have questions, you're going to answer them. And then you're going to say, are there any more questions? Hearing none, the treasurer's report will be filed for audit. And then the secretary will record the totals in their minutes of the beginning balance, the deposits, the disbursements, and the ending balance. I personally recommend that the treasurer give the treasurer's report to the secretary, and they include that as an attachment to the minutes. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to ratify the checks from the prior year. So you're going to have a list of all the checks written since the last association meeting to the end of the prior fiscal year. You're going to say, I move to ratify check numbers 1234 through 1254 totaling 3,000 for the period from 5/22/21 to 6/30/21. We get the motion seconded from the floor. The president's going to say any discussion, and you pause for discussion. Then they're going to call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. Assuming it passes, the president says motion adopted, and your checks, your expenditures have now been ratified by the association. The secretary for audit will include the motions and that list of checks ratified in the minutes. Again, I recommend that you give her the list to include, him or her the list to include as attachment to the minutes. Here's the rest of the, so you're going to adopt the, you're going to actually, they changed it on us. It used to be that you adopt a financial report. Now we just file it for audit. The budget you do want to adopt. So you're going to present the budget. You're going to move to adopt the proposed budget. And then you're going to follow the same process. You're going to release funds that we talked about. I moved to release up to $500 for the Reflections program, up to $200 for Red Raven Week, up to $900 for Spirit Wear. Anything that's coming up, you're going to want to release. So it might be a big list. And again, we're going to go through the motions of a motion, and then the secretary is going to record it in the minutes. I want to remind you, this right here is important. This release alone is not the end of the approval of an expenditure. This does not authorize any chairman or officer to spend the funds, right? The chairman should present their plans to the board, and we need to have the motions by the executive board and the association to authorize those expenditures. And then we go to our current year treasurer's report and ratification of any checks. Print this off, save it to your hard drive, do whatever you need to do. As a unit treasurer, if I had had this, I would have been the happiest girl in the world. I didn't have it yet. This was created when I was at First District, but this is great. It's a great tool to make sure that you do all of the motions and include everything in the minutes for that very important first association meeting of the year. Okay, let's come back to this. Don't worry, I'm going to stop for questions in a minute.
Okay, I was just going to ask you because we're racking up quite a few. So go,
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
So let's see where we're going. Well, you know what? If you have questions, let's stop to answer some questions, and then I can take a drink of water too. Amy, what questions do we have?
All right, I'm going to go in reverse order because some of these are relevant to what you just spoke of, and then we have a few from some prior slides. Okay. So the first question is, does the checks to ratify list still have to be signed by the president and the recording secretary?
So that is, the answer to that is no. And this is something that was done previously, and it was done instead of signing every single payment authorization form individually. And so I've gone into where there's just a list of checks and your president and your secretary have signed that list. That is not adequate, okay? They need to sign every single payment authorization with the receipts attached. They need to sign that because that shows their review of the specific expenditure, right? The president needs to go in and the president needs to look at the receipts to make sure, okay, yes, it was $56.87 that we spent on prizes for the carnival, right? And then they signed that form. By just signing an overall form, that to me as an auditor does not indicate an adequate level of review. If they want to sign that top form and they've already signed the individual authorization forms, fair enough. That's an extra step they can do. But that does not suffice for signing and approving every single individual payment authorization form. What's next?
Great. So the question about the list of the checks to ratify is, do we read each check number, amount, and payee, or just provide a list for the association to see?
Either or. I recommend providing a list so that they can look at it. I personally like to look at it, but every single piece of information, if you don't have a list, then you need to read every single thing off. And if they want to hear it again, you need to do it again, because we want to be as transparent as possible to our association. We never want to look like we're hiding anything.
I would second that. And I would say that it's excruciatingly boring for your attendees to hear every single item, but if you have questions and you need to be able to answer them and address those questions.
Right.
Okay, another comment or question is the motions and minutes document. Can we provide that in Word format so that they can edit it for themselves and use it like a script?
Sure.
Right?
I
thought that was it.
At pta1.org.
Yeah.
Anything
or maybe we can
throw
maybe we can throw it up in the shared file when the conference is over. We can put it in Word format. Okay.
We'll do that. Yeah.
All right. Another question.
Smarter, Amy.
I've got all right. Another question about ratifying expenses. Do we have to ratify up to the date of the association meeting? We have ratified just up to the previous executive board meeting in the past. So at the first association meeting, we ratify from our last association meeting to our last executive board meeting.
So that is a perfectly fine way to do it, as long as at the next meeting you go from executive to executive. You want to make sure that you cover every single expenditure. And so just make sure that whatever method you adopt, you're using consistently throughout the year to make sure that every single check or every single expenditure is approved by the executive board and ratified by the association.
All right. So the treasurer's binder, is that kept at school or in the treasurer's personal possession, or both?
That I keep it in my, I'm looking at the first district stuff right now. You need to have it at your home. Once you are done, once that has been audited, that will go in the permanent files on campus or wherever the permanent files of the association are. So no treasurer will retain anything after they're done with their job. But during their job, you need to have it at home so you can do your job.
All right. And then the other two questions are just a little bit of housekeeping. Someone did ask about the 3-to-1 rule for fundraising, and I went ahead and dropped the definition of that and the link to where that can be found in the California State PTA Toolkit in the chat. So if you missed that, go ahead and scroll up, or Jessica, maybe you can address that. I think it was on slide 6.
Yes, that is coming up too. A lot of things that I'm not hitting, it's because I know what's coming up.
There you go.
So hold on, and if I don't at the end answer something that you've answered, that you've asked in the chat, we'll make sure we get those answers to you.
Right. And then the last one was just a reminder that we are recording these sessions and they will be available for viewing later.
Perfect.
That was asked as well.
Okay, let's move on to the treasurer's report. What is a treasurer's report that we speak of? We've talked a lot about these treasurer's report, right? So a treasurer's report is simply showing the beginning balance since the last period. So at the very top, you're going to have the report period. Okay. And we talked about in the motion to minutes, I think we had, let's use August 18th as our date again. So if you're running a treasurer's report, you want to make sure that up at the top, it says this is from July 1st to August 18th, because then your next treasurer's report is going to start on what date? You're all saying August 19th out loud, right? And you're going to want to make sure that that next, if we ended that treasurer's report on August 18th with $12,000, that's the ending balance. The beginning balance of our treasurer's report on August 19th needs to be $12,000. So we know that we're not missing any funds. We're reporting everything to the association. So on your treasurer's report, you're going to show your report period. You're going to do a roll forward for every single bank account. So if you have two, if you have your checking account, you're going to start with your opening balance for your checking account. You're going to show every single receipt or piece of income with a total for income. You're going to show every single check you wrote or disbursement with a total for disbursements and an ending balance. You can Google treasurer's report, CAPTA, and it's going to show you an example of a treasurer's report. For every single account, you're going to do that, okay? And then in that list of checks written, that can be your list as long as it is fully inclusive. That can be your list of checks that you ratify. So then you just look at your if you have checks 1001 through 1020 as your disbursements, then you say, I move to ratify checks 1001 through 1020 totaling $5,000. So now you've reported everything to your association that you need to do, and you have given them enough information for them to approve those motions. Okay, budget committee, here we go. So I'm going to start moving a little bit quicker. So the budget committee, at the end of the year, like during this time, you guys should have done this at this point. Your president-elect appoints, so it's going to be your president-elect most likely, your treasurer-elect, your outgoing president, and your outgoing treasurer, and then anybody else that wants to be on that. Make sure you include incoming and outgoing. One, it's one out of respect, and two, they know what happened for the last term. So we need to make sure that we listen to history to be able to create something new, right? You're going to want to think about your financial plan for the year. What are your goals for the year? And again, I just talked about new and old, and at the end of that, you will have a proposed budget. So again, you're going to review past budgets, income and expenditures. You're going to want to estimate your probable income, and you're going to estimate your probable expenses. The budget timeline, your proposed budget to the board at the end of the first fiscal year, at the last meeting of the year. You're going to release any funds that you're going to need over the summer. If we don't release the funds at the end of the fiscal year for the incoming board, then until we have that first meeting or that first fundraiser, they don't have the ability to write any checks or make any payments. So what if they need membership envelopes? What if they need membership incentives? What if they're going to sell apparel, right? We need to think about those things at the last association meeting of the year. We need to release those funds. So we need to release a motion to release $1,000 to purchase apparel for the upcoming fiscal year, or release $100 for membership envelopes for the upcoming fiscal year. And that action enables the incoming board to make those payments, to do the business of the association before you have that first association meeting of the year. And then at the first meeting of the next year, you're going to come in with the new board. The new full board is going to look at the budget and make sure it's 100% in line with all of the new board's goals based on that survey that we talked about. And you're going to repropose a revised budget to the association at the first association of the meeting of the year. Okay, I'm going to put this up, but what I want to do is come on out again and let's see. We're going to walk through a budget, guys. I made it too big. Here is CAPTA's budget. Okay. So your budget is going to start with your balance on hand, or your expected balance on hand as of July 1. And then we're going to estimate our income. We really don't know what our income is going to be, right? Interest income is usually pretty easy. Membership dues, membership dues for the last year has been hard, right? Normally we take about 100% of membership dues from last year, and we use that for our membership dues for the next year. This past year, we all hit 50%. So that was hard. Really think about that. Think about what your school's doing. Do you have a lot of people moving out? Do you have a huge influx of kindergartners? Think about that when you put those membership numbers. Do your best to create a really strong income number, because that income number drives what you can do in your programs for the year, right? And then fundraising, set a goal. You know, this is where we talked about fundraisers. So what is the fundraiser rule? You can have 3 programs to a single fundraiser. So one fundraiser needs to cover at least 3 non-fundraisers. Now, don't let that intimidate you. A non-fundraiser could be a list of so many things. The goal is, the overarching mission of the PTA is not to be a fundraising institution. We are not a fundraising organization. We fundraise to support our programs, right? Which is why we want to have 3 programs to 1 fundraiser. The focus is the programs, not the fundraiser. Hopefully that answered that 3-to-1 rule question. Okay, so we're going to list those fundraisers separately. Guys, this is very important. This receipt's not belonging to the unit. I can't tell you how many people don't do this part right. With your per capita, and I might be a little bit ahead of myself, but that's great. With your per capita, say you have $10, which is your membership dues, right? You most likely keep something like $4.25 at your unit, right? So that is what goes in the unit portion. If I get 100 memberships for $10, I need to split that up, okay? So 100 memberships times, doggone it, I'm gonna have to do math now. 100 memberships times $4.25, which is what the unit keeps. I'm gonna put $42.50 in my unit portion, right? The remainder is the amount that is not the units. It is the per capita that it needs to go to your council, first district, state, and national. So that's $575. So of those 10 or of those 100 memberships, I'm doing this wrong. That's 10 memberships. Of those 10 memberships, $57.50 is going to go in this line. That is receipts not belonging to the unit. Why does this matter? This is not included in your gross receipts for your taxes, because this is not considered to be unit income. So we need to include those 2 separate lines. We need to make sure that we split those out. There might be questions on that. We can come back and do another example. So you're going to do your best to make sure that you estimate your income so that you can estimate how much money you can spend on your programs. In your expenses, you're going to want to separate it like this. You're going to organize your expenses under operating expenses, program expenses, and fundraising expenses. Why? Again, this is tax driven. This is how all of the governing authorities are going to want to look at it. So if you organize it this way, then it's really easy to just fill out your taxes, right? Operating expenses are going to be anything that we need to use to run the organization, anything that's not fundraising or program oriented, okay? Your programs are going to be your assemblies, your reflections program, any family engagement, emergency preparedness, hospitality. We'll come back to hospitality a little bit later. And then your fundraising, if you had a carnival and your carnival is in your minutes identified as a fundraiser, then any expenses related to the carnival are fundraising expenses. That is if we have identified it as a fundraiser, that's when it goes into fundraising income. But again, that's when it comes back to, you don't want to have a ton of fundraisers, right? Because that's your 3-to-1 rule. You need to have 3 programs to each single fundraiser. This carryover to next year, you need to make sure that you have identified funds. This is for the startup funds for the incoming board. We need to make sure that we have funds set aside so that they can operate before your first fundraiser of the year, okay? You should not have unallocated reserves. I don't like that CAPTA puts this in here. Every district treasurer has, some things that they don't love that CAPTA does. This is mine. I do not believe you should have unallocated reserves. Any remaining funds will just go into your balance on hand. Okay. And then finally, disbursements not belonging to the unit. This number up here, receipts not belonging to the unit and disbursements not belonging to the unit, those should be the same numbers, right? So the 5750 that we held aside to remit back to council, district, state, and national, we need to make sure that we remit those. When we pay those are going to go down into this disbursements not belonging to the unit. Okay, so this is what your budget should look like. This is what you're going to present to your committee, to your board, and to your association. Do we have questions on the budget, guys?
I don't have any questions in the chat about the budget specifically,
Okay.
but so you're either nailing it or everyone's in shock and awe.
And
Let's go with your nailing it.
I'm guessing it's the latter, but that's okay. We can talk about it a little bit later too. Okay. Monitoring the budget, guys. The budget is not set and done. It is a live document, right? If you need to adjust it throughout the year, say some incredible donor came in and said, here's $20,000 for your PTA to use however you want. We didn't expect that money. Well, now we can do a new program, right? You can update your budget. The only thing you need to do is make sure that you present that to your board and your association for approval, okay? And that is the chair's role. That is your role to make sure that you're updating that budget. Let's see.
So a few more questions have dropped in now. So I don't know if you want to answer them before moving on, or I'm not sure how close you are to moving on. Okay. The first question is, how much should we carry over to the next year? What is the estimate?
Oh, that is the $1 million question in PTA. Yeah. Some PTAs only have $1,000 to carry over. Some PTAs carry over $100,000 a year. And so that is going to be purely based on the needs and the funds of your PTA. The pure answer to that, if you don't have excess funds, is you need to ensure that you carry over enough funds to allow the new executive board to fund the business of the association until the first fundraiser. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have held back and haven't spent enough money so that the new board can start working. So if that's $1,000, $3,000, that's totally dependent on your association. The best thing to do is to look back, I would say 2 years, and look at what was spent from July 1 to say September 30th, right? That's when the money really starts coming in. Whatever was spent from July 1 to September 30th, we probably need to hold that aside for carryover funds to make sure that we can continue as a PTA operating for those first 3 months before the first fundraiser. That's the first half. The second half answer to that question is, what if you're that association that lives in a very wealthy area and has $100,000 in their accounts, right? And we have some of them. The IRS rule is that you need to spend a majority of the funds that you raise in that specific year. A majority, by definition, is over 50%. So if you raised $100,000 that year, you need to have spent on your programs that year $50,001. That is not the PTA answer. That will keep you safe with the IRS, so we need to make sure that we share that. But my answer to that is, you need to look at the intent of the donors, right? If a parent donated $1,000 that year Their intent was for that money to be spent on their child and the children at your school that year. So you really need to do your best to make sure that you are designing programs with the intent, like aligned with the intent of your donors. So I do not recommend carrying over a significant amount of money. I don't recommend carrying over a majority. I recommend using the funds that in the year that you receive the funds based on that donor's intent. Amy, do you think I covered that?
Yeah, I think that really does cover that topic well. And the follow-up to that was the questioner, the asker says, we were told that we should spend most of the fundraising funds on the programs and students that we raise in that year. So that really does speak to what you just said. So that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly the goal. You need to spend it in the year it's received based on the intent of the donor for the students that are in that school that year. If you have 6th grade parents in an elementary school and they donated $1,000 and you didn't spend it, they might ask for that money back.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, so there are just 2 more quick questions. One I think you have already addressed. You talked about asking the board what the goals are, discussing board goals. So the question was if there was a sample survey to the board to see what the goals are. So do you want to speak to that?
I don't have a sample survey. Have you seen a sample survey?
No, but I think that, it's one thing to talk about goals amongst your board members, and that really should, is best done in a meeting setting, because I think that's more like almost like a retreat situation. But I think the other key thing is to survey your PTA members and see what their expectations are, or how their view of PTA is in general, and not just specifically to finances, but in general, how they feel the PTA is doing as far as, supporting students and supporting the school. And then working as a board on your goals from that kind of a survey. And that kind of a survey, I do have one that I could share, but it's not a board goal survey.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to design a survey, look at what you've done in the past and ask based on that. Did you enjoy this? How successful was this? Is there anything else that you would like to see us do in the future? If you keep it fairly focused on what you've done and what they would like to see going forward, you're going to get some great answers. The more specific you make it, you're limiting the answers that you're going to get. So you don't want a super specific survey. You want to enable them to give you, their true opinions. But really work with the outgoing and the incoming executive boards to design a survey. And the reason we don't have one is because, as we've talked about today, every single school unit is so different. So what one school creates for their survey may be completely inapplicable to yours. And so that's something that you really need to I guarantee you there's somebody on your board that is great at creating surveys, and we just need to tap into that person, right?
Exactly. And then the last one, Jessica, is just a clarifying question about approval of the budget. And I do believe that this came up during the initial discussion about creating a budget for the next school year. So the question was, does the association approve the budget or the executive board? So
thank you. Let's talk about the roles for 1 second. The executive board is kind of the one that looks at everything to make sure that they're the first level of review. The funds belong to the association. The last and final word is the association. So if you look at it and the executive board is going to review it to make sure everything falls in line with all the PTA protocols and in line with our budget and in line with our goals. But at the end of the day, everything needs to be approved by the association. There is almost nothing that just gets approved at the executive board and isn't sent to the association. The association has the final word, which is why the annual financial report is presented to the association. The budget is presented to the association and the association adopts it. Every single expenditure First, we have to ask the association to release the funds after they've been budgeted. And then we need to make sure that they're okay with the specifics of the check, and they need to ratify the actions of the treasurer. So every single step comes to the association. That is your voting body. They're the ones that have the power over the funds of the association. The executive board just kind of acts as the trust. They're the ones that do the day-to-day business. Did that answer? You have anything else to add, Amy?
I have nothing else to add to that at all. I think that was fantastic. I
Okey
did
dokey.
want to note it is 10:14,
And when do we end?
10:30.
Okay, this is awesome because I have one more slide before part 2. So it worked out well. One thing I do want to talk about is a little bit of notice for meetings, okay? When you are presenting your budget, you need to ensure that you have appropriate notice given to your association. That's not the treasurer's role. However, the treasurer is so involved in the operations that it's really great for the treasurer to work with the president and say, hey, remember, for the budget, we need to make sure that we let the association know that something big is coming, right? You cannot actually, according to your bylaws, let them know on Thursday, hey, we're going to adopt a new budget tomorrow. Well, actually, that's not true. You can, but with no notice, you need to get a 2/3 vote to approve it. If you give notice, the appropriate notice that's in your bylaws, again, make sure you're reading your bylaws, then it's only a 50%. A majority vote is required to amend a budget, adopt or amend. If there is no notice, it's a 2/3 vote. Again, no notice is not recommended. We always want to follow those notices. For an association meeting, it's usually 10 days, except for the election, and that is 30 days. We want to make sure that we're giving our association notice to make sure that they feel like they're part of it and that we're not hiding something from them. Transparency and reporting to your association is so key to them trusting the executive board. Okay. For the budget, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later, it talks about monitoring it. Run a budget to actual, compare where you are. How much money have we brought in compared to what we expect to get? How much money have we spent compared to what we've brought in and what we expected to spend? As a treasurer, I present that to the executive board on a monthly basis and to my association at every association meeting. It's not required, but it is recommended to give them that comparison and let them look. It's also helpful because they might catch something that you didn't catch. I can't tell you how many times somebody on my executive board have been like, oh, hey, Jessica, it looks like we went over by $20 on this. And I went, oh, thank you. Let's amend that, right? They're that second, third, fourth, fifth set of eyes that we all need because 1, we're volunteers and we don't have a whole ton of time to devote this. And 2, we're human and mistakes happen. Okay, I think that's all before we move on to the real critical stuff. Let's see. Dealing with income. PTAs do not have petty cash boxes. Can I say that again? PTAs do not have petty cash boxes. Everybody thumbs up if you heard me. No petty cash boxes, okay, guys? Now, if you have a carnival coming up and people are paying by cash and you need to have cash on hand, that's okay. You can write a check to the chairperson of the carnival and they can cash it. And then they will reimburse the PTA, okay? But we do not just take petty cash out of our accounts ever because we want to make sure that's the easiest way for cash to get lost. If we pay somebody, then we know we need to get it back from somebody, right? So make sure that we're not doing any petty cash. When you deal with income, anytime you have funds coming in, when you count that, you're going to use what we call a cash verification form. And I'm going to open up, that's on our next slide. This is something you will want to have tons of copies printed and ready at any time. This is one of the most important forms for a PTA treasurer to have. You will always use a cash verification form with income. You will always have two people counting income. Never will you have one person counting income. And there's reasons for that, right? One is that's the easiest way to lose money. Somebody can slip a 20 in their pocket. Not that our treasurers were and will. And this is what I always want to say, because I'm a treasurer and treasurers get questioned more than anybody else because we have access to the funds, right? So the reason for these controls and these rules, the reason why we always have two people, one of them being the chairperson or a board member, and the other one not related by blood or living in the same household, is we are protecting our volunteers. We want to make sure that there's no way anybody could say, well, hey, Jessica could have just stolen the money. Well, no, she couldn't, because she was counting it with somebody else. And they both signed that this was the amount of money that they had, and they're not related and they don't live in the same household. So that is a control to protect you. Like I said, you are the senior official over the funds of the association. We want to make sure we do everything to make sure that you are protected. Okay. You're going to want to deposit it ASAP. Too many times the money goes to somebody's house and then it really never makes it to the bank. I've had that happen several times. You want to make sure that you take that. Now, if it's on a Friday night at a carnival and you can't take it to the bank, I recommend you putting it in a safe at your school. If your school does not have a safe, I recommend you investing in a safe for your PTA, where only check signers have access to the safe. Okay. Let's go to our cash verification, guys.
I'm going to be the president. Oh, I don't want to be the
Jessica, we have a few questions
Yep, go ahead.
about counting cash.
Yep,
The
let's
first
talk.
one, okay. The first one is actually about electronic payments like Venmo or Zelle. Are we allowed to set that up in our bank account?
We are not. You are allowed to use Zelle. Sorry, let's talk about those separately. Zelle is a program that is run and falls under the controls and the federal banking guidelines and laws. And so it has a level of business to business controls that we would expect a PTA to use. So Zelle is okay. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the paperwork that we need to file to use that and the approvals we need to get. Venmo is a peer-to-peer app. We do not use peer-to-peer apps in PTA. I know that Venmo is starting a business one, and I promise to get you guys an answer on that this year. But we need to look into it a little bit more to make sure it has those controls over the PTA funds. So no to Venmo, yes to Zelle, as long as we follow the PTA guidelines. Yes to PayPal, because again, that is something that is run by a financial institution that falls under those governing regulations.
So there is a follow-up question about PayPal. And the question is, do you need a separate bank account for PayPal only?
Great question. Again, something that we'll hit later on. We recommend, not require, CAPTA used to require it. We've changed it to a recommendation that anytime you use or you have electronic transactions, you have a separate account for your electronic funds transactions. It's not required. It is highly recommended. So I would recommend you have a checking account and you open a second account. If you have a credit union, you could use that savings account. We're just separating it because they have different levels of controls, right? So if you have any electronic, if Zelle is coming in, if you're using PayPal, you want to make sure those are going into a separate bank account. Again, recommended, not required.
So the follow-up to the follow-up is, what about Square? Same question, but about Square.
Absolutely. Yep. We use Square in First District.
Yes.
The one thing to think about with Square and PayPal is they are going to charge you to use them, right? They're going to charge you that credit card fee. And so that is something that is now a fee that your organization, so instead of getting $10 or $100 or whatever, you're going to have to pay them 2.5 to 3.5% of each transaction. So that is something that you're going to want to include in your budget and get approved by your board and approved by your association on the budget, because that is the same thing as an expenditure.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
One more about counting money, just to clarify, can the
Yep.
financial secretary count money with another board member?
Absolutely. 2 board members can always, it just needs to be 1 board member and 1 member. Those 2 people cannot be related or living under the same roof. Okay, and again, that's for our protection. So let's talk a little bit about this cash verification form that's up on the screen. So this is the cash verification form. You're going to fill out the unit name, ABC PTA, whatever the activity is, and the date. You're going to add all of the coins and currency. You're going to keep the check numbers. Guys, I recommend along with this, keeping copies of the checks. Okay. You guys are going to be like, wait, what? When I keep copies of the checks, I line them up so the bank account number and the signatures cannot be seen to keep somebody's privacy. But then at least I know the check number, I know how much it was written for, I know who wrote it. Because sometimes when you get it, what if something bounces? You might need that information later on, right? So along with your cash verification form, you're going to keep copies of those checks, but you're going to overlap them so that you're covering any personal information. We do not want to keep people's personal information in our permanent files. Okay. So you're going to add your coins, you're going to add your currency and your checks. So many times I've had way too many checks and I have to go to the back. Also, this is not a required form. You can create your own form as long as it has all of this stuff, right? The great thing about this form is how many times do we collect checks for membership? It shows how many members came in, what their dues were, or if there were any donations on that, and a grand total for that. Because when you go to enter that, you're going to want to account for that separately. Most importantly, anytime the 2 people who are counting want to sign here below. Okay, both people. If the treasurer or the financial secretary, the person who's going to make the deposit, is not one of them, then when that is passed to them, they're going to want to count as well and indicate that they received that amount here. This is then taken to the bank with the money. At the bank, you're going to deposit it. They're going to give you a deposit receipt. You're going to keep that deposit receipt. I usually just tape it to the back of this cash verification form, and that cash verification form with the receipt, copies of checks, if you have them, goes into your treasurer's binder for audit. One thing I really want to emphasize, and if you don't listen to anything else today and you listen to this is an important thing. When every single person who was included in the process for counting cash should take a picture of this cash verification form. I'm going to say that one more time. Anybody that was involved in the process for counting cash should take a picture of this cash verification form. Why? If the money goes losing, what went losing with it? The cash verification form. We have no idea how much money was taken in. And so when we go to our insurance company to say, hey, money was stolen, we have no proof. I can't tell you on my phone, back when I was a unit treasurer, how many pictures of cash verification forms I had. And once the money is deposited and we know it's there, we've seen it, you can delete it. But until that money is in the bank, and if you were included in the process, you want a picture of that, because that is your personal proof, but that is also proof for the organization to be able to send to our insurance company saying, hey, look, 1, this was the amount of money, and 2, okay, we followed the procedure. We had 2 people counting, the treasurer signed, we did everything right. Can you give us our money back? Okay, that is actually it. We've covered everything for part one. I believe we hit all of this stuff. Do you guys have any questions on anything we've talked about? Or we can just take a quick break. I think almost everybody's coming back for treasurer too. So Amy, what other questions do we have?
Well, very quickly, there's a question about startup cash and how to account for that on the cash verification form.
So on the cash verification form, this is going to be a matter of personal preference. There is a cash verification form that I've seen that has actually the startup cash up above now that you can find on CAPTA. I tend to use a separate cash verification form for cash in and cash out for that petty cash or the startup cash. I want to see it coming in over here and going back out over here, and I'm going to staple those together and keep them together completely separate from the cash verification form that I'm going to use for whatever event I use that I'm counting cash for, right? I like to use them separately. You can use the one that has it up at the top. Just be very clear, very, very clear about the money that came in. And frankly, I have people initial everything. If I'm using the same thing, I don't want just 2 signatures down at the bottom. I want signatures on the cash coming in up at the top too, and the total cash verification form at the bottom. My recommendation, use 2 different ones.
Okay,
Anything-
so yeah, I have 3 other questions.
Okay.
This workshop technically ends at 10:40, but to your point, sorry, at 10:30, and the next one starts technically at 10:40. And to your point, there's very likely going to be not a lot of movement as far as members of this this discussion.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to take this 10 minutes to just discuss these last 3 questions, or wait until 10:40 when we restart with Treasurer 2.
So Treasurer 2 is not quite, I mean, it's critical information, but it's where I'm expecting us to have a lot of Q&A, a lot of more open conversation. So let's all take a break. We'll stop recording. We'll come back at 10:40, or just if you're staying, go ahead and stay on and just mute. Everybody can go get a drink, take a bio break, whatever you need to do. And then we can start off with those questions, and then we'll jump into part 2.
Sounds great.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing then, and we'll see you guys all in 10 minutes.